rain had been falling for hours, a cold, unrelenting drizzle that turned the cracked asphalt behind the warehouse into a mirror of gray and shadow. I was halfway through the alley when movement caught my eye. Slender, desperate, trembling under a sheet of dripping tarps. She was there before I even realized it. A shepherd, her fur plastered to her body, eyes wide and frantic, glinting with intelligence and fear. She didn't approach. She watched me, calculating, hesitant, like she was carrying a secret too heavy to share. The smell of wet earth mixed with something sharper, fear, hunger, and the faint copper tang of blood. And then I saw them. Tiny shapes huddled beneath a broken pallet, shivering in the cold, barely more than shadows in the darkness. Pups, her pups, her pups. My chest tightened in a way that made every heartbeat feel like it could break. She stepped back, nudging them gently with her nose, and froze, as if daring me to come closer, or warning me to stay away. In that instant, I understood. This wasn't just a rescue. This was trust being earned, moment by fragile moment. The rain had been relentless for hours, a steady gray curtain that blurred the edges of the world and drummed against the corrugated roofs of the abandoned warehouses. Each drop fell like a small, cold pulse, a quiet insistence on the misery already etched into the night. I moved cautiously along the cracked asphalt behind the building, shoes splashing in shallow puddles, heart thudding in rhythm with the storm. There was a scent in the air that made my stomach twist. Wet earth mingled with something sharper, something primal, and as I squinted through the dim light, I saw her. The shepherd was a shadow in the darkness, a form flattened against the cold cement, trembling in the drizzle as though the night itself was pressing against her fragile frame. Her fur was matted and darkened with rain, streaked with the faint dust of the alley, and she watched me with wide, intelligent eyes alive with fear and wariness. She didn't approach. She didn't growl. She only studied me, each tilt of her head precise, calculating, protective. And yet, in the way she held herself, I understood immediately that she was guarding something far smaller, far more fragile. My breath fogged the space between us as I crouched a few meters away, careful to stay slow. The sound of water dripping from rusted gutters and the distant hum of traffic became part of the tense symphony around us. I wasn't sure if it was courage or recklessness that drew me closer, but the deeper instinct that flared in my chest was empathy. The raw, uncomfortable tug of wanting to reach out and make things better. That's when I noticed them. Shadows beneath a broken wooden pallet, too small to be anything but alive, shivering violently against the cold, tiny limbs entangled in each other for warmth. Pups. Her pups. My heart lurched and the air felt heavier, as though the night itself had inhaled sharply. The mother's gaze flicked to the pile of trembling shapes, a mixture of relief, fear, and caution painting her features. She nudged them gently with her nose, pressed herself against the smallest one, and froze as if daring me to come closer, or warning me to stay away. It was a delicate, tense standoff, a silent negotiation conducted with body language and breath, with a faint sound of rain hitting puddles as a constant metronome. Every instinct screamed at me to move slowly, carefully. I lowered my hands and made no sudden noises, focusing on the rise and fall of my own chest and the way the rain slicked down my hair. The mother's eyes never left mine. In them, I could see the story of countless streets walked alone, of nights endured with nothing but cold and hunger, of fights fought and dangers evaded. She wasn't just protecting her pups. She was carrying the memory of all the nights she had survived without help, a silent ledger of fear and perseverance. I could almost feel her heartbeat, quick and sharp, and it mirrored my own. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare ask aloud. Would she let me get closer? Could she sense that I wasn't a threat, that my intentions were nothing but care and safety? Every second stretched into eternity, the rain muffling the world around us, making the alley feel like its own fragile universe, suspended between danger and salvation. I edged a step closer, wet boots squishing against the slick asphalt, hands trembling as if the cold had seeped into my very bones. The pups whimpered softly, tiny sounds that cut through the rain like fragile glass. The mother tensed, ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring, every muscle coiled in anticipation. She made a low, almost imperceptible growl, not of aggression, but of warning, a reminder that this world was hers to protect. I froze mid-step, eyes locked on hers, willing her to understand that I would not harm them. I reached slowly into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of dry bread, cradling it like an offering. holding my breath as I set it gently on the puddled ground between us. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me, calculating again, and I could see the micro-expressions of hunger battling instinctual caution. She inched forward just slightly, nose twitching, whiskers brushing the bread, then backed away, retreating into the shadows, her tail flicking once, tense and deliberate. It was a small victory, and yet my chest felt like it had been stretched tight by invisible hands, relief mixing with the knowledge that trust, even the smallest kind, could shatter instantly. The wind picked up, pushing rain into the alley sideways, stinging the raw edges of skin exposed on my hands. I knelt fully, arms out in a gesture of patience, waiting, hoping. Every muscle in my body was alert to the subtle movements of the mother. Twitch of an ear, the shift of weight, the way her tail remained stiff yet lowered slightly. The pups, sensing some imperceptible signal, huddled closer together, and I saw the tiniest tremble in the smallest one's legs. I whispered softly, not really words, just murmurs of presence, and the mother's eyes softened fractionally, though the wariness never left completely. The rain, relentless and cold, became a kind of veil, making the scene feel isolated from time itself, as if the world had paused, leaving only this fragile negotiation suspended in gray. The smell of wet fur and earth filled my senses, grounding me, connecting me to the urgency and the fragile beauty of survival. Minutes passed that felt like hours, each one an oscillation of hope and fear. I shifted my weight slightly, careful not to startle, and the mother shifted too, always watching, always weighing, always protecting. One of the pups ventured a tentative sniff toward the bread, tiny body quivering violently, and I could see the mother's eyes follow every motion. A low whine escaped her throat, a sound that was half warning, half plea. A symphony of her fears and hopes all bundled into a single note. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension in my shoulders ease just fractionally, and in that breath, I realized the enormity of the moment. I wasn't just witnessing survival. I was participating in a fragile act of trust, a tiny bridge being built in a world that had shown them nothing but shadows and rain. I thought of all the nights I had taken warmth for granted, the cold forgotten under blankets, the hunger passed without notice. And here, in this alley, beneath the relentless drizzle, I felt a deep human connection to her courage, her vigilance, and the weight of her motherhood. The night pressed on, the rain washing the edges of the world in gray, and still we stood there, locked in a silent understanding. I could see it in the smallest gestures. The mother nudging her pups closer to her chest, the way she shifted to create a shield with her body, the faint flicker of hope in her cautious eyes. I stayed low, unmoving except for the occasional breath, a presence without threat, a steady rhythm in a world that had offered only chaos. The pups, sensing some tiny measure of safety, began to explore slightly, their trembling less violent, their whine softer. And for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to believe that we were not just bystanders in this cold, wet night. We were participants in something profoundly human and animal alike. The fragile, painstaking act of building trust, of reaching across fear with nothing but intention and patience. In the gray shadows behind the warehouse, the rain fell endlessly, but beneath it, a quiet, almost imperceptible hope began to grow, a spark that neither wind nor water could extinguish. The drizzle had softened into a light mist, the alley now glistening under the occasional flicker of a distant streetlight. Every puddle reflected fragments of the night, fractured shadows of warehouses, of dripping metal roofs, of my own tense silhouette crouched near the trembling family. The mother shepherd had not moved far from her pups, still pressed close to them as if her body alone could shield them from the cold, from the world, from me. Her eyes never left mine, sharp and searching, wary yet hinting at something tentative. I could feel the air around us thick with unspoken dialogue. Patience traded for proximity, fear measured against hope. Each breath I took felt like trespassing, yet every step I inched closer was a silent promise that harm would not come, only care. I laid out a thin layer of old blankets soaked but warmer than the cold concrete, and the mother flinched at the touch. It was not fear of me exactly, but fear of change, of the unknown. I froze, hands hovering, giving her the space to decide. Slowly, a low whine escaped her throat, not entirely hostile, not entirely pleading, a sound that carried the weight of responsibility, a note only a mother could make for her vulnerable young. Time stretched taut around us, every second etched with caution. The pups were restless, tiny limbs flailing, noses sniffing the wet air, discovering each other and the strange intruder in soft, tentative motions. One of the smallest dared to move toward me, wet paws leaving faint smudges on the asphalt. The mother's growl was soft but unmistakable, a low rumble that rolled from her chest in protective cadence. I stayed still, voice low and even, murmuring reassurance, though I knew she might not understand the words, only the intention. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she leaned forward and nudged her smallest pup toward the blanket, careful, meticulous, as though weighing every ounce of risk against potential warmth. My heart thumped in quiet rhythm, a drumbeat of both anticipation and awe. Each gesture, each micro-expression became a language of trust, a dialogue of care without word. Her fur, slick with rain, glinted faintly in the dim light, and I could see the strength in her ribs, the muscles taut beneath skin, a living reminder of the night she had survived alone, of the vigilance carried for her little family. I reached out slowly, offering my hand, palm down, flat, nothing hidden, no sudden motions. The mother's ears flicked back, her eyes narrowing, calculating every possibility. I felt sweat bead under my collar, despite the rain, tension threading through me like electricity. The air was heavy with the scent of wet fur and earth, a raw, elemental perfume that seemed to anchor me in the urgency of the moment. Her pupils dilated, her tail twitched slightly, and in that flicker, I glimpsed a possibility. She might let me be close, but only if I proved patience could coexist with safety. I lowered myself further, stilling every motion, letting the silence speak. One of the pups, bold or desperate I couldn't tell, scuttled closer, pressing against my boot. The mother's eyes shot to the tiny shape, and she growled, low, measured. My pulse jumped, yet I did not flinch. I knew that the growl was not condemnation, but communication. A reminder that her trust was not freely given, that it was a currency to be earned slowly, with care and consistency. I set a small puddle of warm water in front of them, watching as the mother sniffed and then nudged the pups forward. They hesitated at first, then, driven by thirst and instinct, began to lap delicately. Each movement, each shiver of hesitation, etched itself into my memory. I realized in that quiet observation that trust was not a single act, but a series of infinitesimal choices, repeated until fear lost its dominance. The mother sniffed my hands, then stepped back, watching, calculating again. I spoke softly, letting the words dissolve into the mist, offering reassurance through tone rather than meaning. She tilted her head, a flicker of curiosity passing over her damp features, and I dared a small smile, though my body remained tense, alert to the faintest twitch or flinch. The alley around us was silent but alive. The patter of remaining raindrops, the distant hum of traffic, the soft rustle of rats in the far shadows, everything reminding me of how small and precarious this bubble of fragile connection truly was. After what felt like an eternity compressed into minutes, the mother took another step, slower this time, closer to the blankets. I froze, holding still, breath shallow, heart pounding. She sniffed again, then lowered her nose to nudge the smallest pup onto the fabric, a meticulous act of guidance and protection. The pups began to explore more confidently, noses twitching, tails flicking slightly. The mother remained poised, vigilant, but the edge of tension softened imperceptibly, a shift so subtle that only someone fully present would notice. I leaned slightly forward, offering my hands in open support, and she allowed me the proximity, not fully yet, but enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her body, the rhythm of her breathing mingling with the drizzle around us. It was a first fragile step into trust, the tentative acknowledgement that perhaps, in this moment, we were not threats to each other. I felt tears prick behind my eyes, though I did not move to wipe them. The enormity of the responsibility, the weight of the mother's vigilance, the fragile thread of hope being spun in this gray, wet alley, it all collided in quiet intensity. She shifted again, nudging a pup toward the blanket, then stepping back to monitor, and I realized that this was the first time she had allowed anyone to be so close to her family without fleeing or attacking. Each pup explored a little further, discovering the warmth and the scent of my presence, and I let myself exhale slowly, the tension in my shoulders loosening fractionally. I murmured softly, again not for understanding of language but for recognition of intent, and the mother flicked her ears, then pressed her side gently against one of the pups, a small, intricate ballet of protection and discovery. The alley, once a realm of cold shadows and fear, now felt like a cocoon. The rain continued, a gentle percussion on the puddled concrete, but it no longer seemed hostile. The mother's eyes softened in the dim light, the tiniest hint of trust glimmering as she shifted her posture to allow more space. I stayed low, letting my presence be still and constant, a witness and participant in the quiet miracle unfolding. The pups' tiny whimpers began to blend with contented sighs, the tension in their limbs loosening with every small act of reassurance. For the first time, I felt that fragile heartbeat of hope between us, the first step on a journey neither of us would forget. A delicate beginning of trust built not through force or command, but through patience, empathy, and unwavering attention. The night pressed on, gray and soft, but somewhere beneath the drizzle, a bond had begun, a fragile thread of connection that promised warmth in the face of relentless cold. The night deepened, and the mist thickened into a chill that crept through every layer of clothing, seeping into bones and muscles alike. The alley, once just wet and gray, now felt like a tunnel of shadows, a corridor of isolation where only the mother, her pups, and I existed. The rain had slowed to sporadic droplets, but the cold had not relented, clinging to the little bodies huddled beneath the threadbare blankets. Each pup trembled violently, tiny whimpers rising and falling in uneven cadence, echoing faintly against the warehouse walls. The mother shivered, not just from the cold, but from the weight of responsibility she carried, the invisible burden of protection pressing down on her shoulders and along her spine. I watched her carefully, noting every movement, the flick of her ears, the twitch of her tail, the subtle shift of weight as she repositioned her small charges closer to her warmth. She was exhausted, yet alert, every sense heightened by instinct and fear, every muscle ready to respond to threats only she could perceive. The alley smelled sharply now of wet fur, and the earthy tang of the city, tinged with the faint coppery scent of dried blood, a reminder of the dangers she had faced and perhaps still did. I knelt closer to the edge of the blanket, my breath shallow and deliberate. The mother's gaze followed every motion, tracking my hands, my knees, the slow rise and fall of my chest. One pup, braver than the rest, edged forward, nose twitching, paws sinking slightly into the puddled concrete. A low growl erupted from the mother's throat, resonant and commanding, a ripple of warning that vibrated in the air between us. I froze, letting the sound resonate, letting her make the choice. Continue to defend her children or allow me to approach. Slowly, with exquisite care, she relaxed fractionally, nudging the pup forward just a few inches. It was a delicate negotiation, a ballet of tension and trust performed in silence, punctuated by the distant drip of rain and the occasional rustle of debris along the alley walls. My chest ached with empathy, every nerve alive to the precarious balance of fear and hope that hovered between us. I whispered, not for understanding of words, but as a gentle acknowledgement of her presence and her power, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw her relax even more, the edge of tension softening in her amber eyes. The pups began to explore the edges of the blankets, their tiny bodies shaking with cold but emboldened by the slow, deliberate warmth of her proximity and my own careful patience. I could feel every heartbeat in the night, my own echoing against the rhythm of theirs. The mother shifted again, pressing her chest against one of the smallest pups, drawing it closer, and the motion was a tender, fluid act of both instinct and trust. Each whimper, each tentative paw step, each sniff toward the warmth I offered felt monumental, like the smallest flicker of flame against a long, merciless winter. The alley was silent in all ways that mattered. The distant hum of life beyond the warehouses faded into irrelevance. Only the intimate choreography of survival persisted, the mother's vigilance, the pup's tentative curiosity, and my careful, deliberate presence. A sudden gust of wind rattled the warehouse doors, making loose metal sheets clatter. The mother stiffened immediately, tail flicking, ears pricked. The pups yelped, tiny voices sharp against the sudden cacophony. I remained still, letting the instinct of the mother guide our response. The night had tested us, but it had also begun to reward patience, and in the smallest, quietest ways, the first threads of hope were being woven into the cold fabric of survival. Dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky, the first fragile hints of light softening the hard edges of the alley. The rain had stopped, leaving a fine mist that clung to the cracked concrete and the damp fur of the mother and her pups. Their bodies pressed together on the blanket, still shivering, but with a tentative warmth beginning to spread. I could feel it, the pulse of fragile trust humming through the small family, a delicate tether that had taken hours to weave. The mother's eyes were wary but no longer frantic. There was a rhythm now to her movements, a cautious confidence that came from knowing that her small ones would not be taken from her, that the strange presence beside her meant no harm. Every muscle in her body remained alert, but the tension had begun to loosen. She sniffed the edges of the alley, ears flicking toward distant sounds, and I realized the time had come. We needed to move. The warehouse behind us offered shadow but not safety. The city beyond was unforgiving, and we had to climb out of the cold to find warmth and security beyond this night of rain and fear. I reached for the smallest pup first, careful to cradle it in both hands, feeling its tiny body trembling against my chest. The mother stiffened immediately, tail flicking sharply, ears pressing back, a low growl rumbling from deep in her chest. I froze, waiting, letting her dictate the pace. She shifted just slightly, nudging the pup toward me with her nose, an almost imperceptible gesture of permission. It was enough. The pup snuggled into my arms, its tiny heartbeat frantic but trusting. The second pup followed more hesitantly, and I mirrored the motion, holding out warmth and patience in equal measure. The largest stayed near the mother, who pressed herself low to the ground, muscles taut with protective instinct. I whispered gently, letting my tone communicate calm and safety, and slowly, with small nudges and patient pauses, the remaining pups were gathered. The mother watched every motion, a sentinel in miniature, guiding, testing, calculating. I could feel the rain-soaked chill in my own clothes, in my own bones, but it was nothing compared to the raw vulnerability of her tiny charges. Her eyes followed mine as I adjusted my grip, keeping each pup close to my chest, a protective barrier of warmth against the lingering cold. The alley seemed impossibly long, the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders as much as the damp air pressed on our skin. One misstep, one sudden movement, and the delicate trust we had built could shatter. But step by careful step, we began to move, following the narrow path that led out from the shadowed warehouse area. Each footfall was deliberate, measured, mindful of the slick concrete of the smallest puddle that could trip or startle, of the mother's watchful gaze. A sudden clang of metal made the mother's ears prick sharply, tail flicking in alarm. The pups whined softly, pressed closer to my chest, and my heart lurched in response. I froze, letting the echo of the noise pass, and the mother followed the sound first, then returned to her pups, low whine of reassurance vibrating in the air. I realized then that the rescue was not merely physical. It was a dialogue, a negotiation conducted in breath and gesture and quiet persistence. Every inch gained was earned through patience and empathy. Every heartbeat shared a silent promise of safety. The alley opened gradually into a wider street, littered with debris but illuminated faintly by the pale morning light. The mother hesitated, tail tucked slightly, eyes scanning the unknown territory ahead. I knelt, crouched low to appear smaller, softer, less threatening, and murmured quietly. Slowly, she took a step forward, then another, guiding the pups in a cautious, protective formation, each movement precise and deliberate. The climb to safety was physical and emotional. Puddles and debris required careful navigation, each step risking a stumble, each stumble threatening to disrupt the fragile equilibrium. The mother led when necessary, circling back when instinct dictated, and I mirrored her movements, adjusting my pace to hers, to the rhythm of the small lives in my arms. There was a moment when one pup squirmed violently, slipping slightly from my grasp, and I caught it mid-motion, heart hammering, breath shallow. The mother barked softly, a sound that was more a reminder than a reprimand, and the pup nestled back into my chest. That single interaction encapsulated everything we had built: communication, trust, patience, and the unspoken understanding that together we could navigate the unknown. Wind picked up briefly, whistling down the street, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant traffic. The mother's fur bristled slightly, muscles tensing, but she did not flee. She was teaching her pups, teaching me, teaching all of us, that courage could coexist with caution, that instinct could bend under careful guidance. I adjusted my hold on the pups, moving slower now, deliberate, breathing deeply to maintain calm, and we continued. The alley opened further into a narrow park, benches soaked, grass slick with moisture, trees dripping with mist. The pups wriggled gently, tiny bodies beginning to relax as the warmth of proximity to both mother and human became familiar. The mother walked slightly ahead, keeping watch, then turned to glance back, and in that glance I saw the faintest trace of trust. It was in that park that the first true moment of relief arrived. A bench offered a place to rest, a mound of dry leaves nearby, a makeshift sanctuary. I knelt, setting the pups gently on the bench, letting their tiny legs touch something solid and safe. The mother circled, sniffing, nudging, then returned to settle close to them. I exhaled, heart still hammering, recognizing that the climb to safety had been successful, that the fragile bond had endured the first major test of movement and uncertainty. The morning light painted everything in soft gold and gray, mist curling around us like a protective veil, and I could feel the tension in my shoulders finally begin to release. The mother nudged the pups one by one, teaching them to move, to explore cautiously, to trust the warmth beside them. Each movement, each gentle push, each careful sniff was a lesson in survival and faith. I remained close, letting my presence be steady, reliable, a bridge between the known and the unknown. The pups ventured further, tiny paws sinking into soft leaves, tails beginning to wag in small, tentative arcs. The mother's gaze softened more with each moment, and I realized that our shared journey was transforming fear into something gentler, connection, trust, and the beginnings of hope. By the time the mist began to thin and the pale sun broke the horizon fully, the family was settled on the bench, pups nestled into warmth, mother pressed protectively around them. We had crossed the most dangerous threshold yet, not just physical cold and shadow, but the precarious chasm of fear and doubt. Each of us, human and animal, had navigated the climb together, step by careful step, building trust with patience, care, and unwavering presence. The climb to safety was not merely an escape from the night. It was a quiet triumph, a testament to courage, resilience, and the fragile miracle of trust earned in the gray, wet edges of a world that had shown them so little kindness. The sun had begun its slow climb, spilling pale gold over the wet city streets, turning puddles into molten mirrors that reflected the fragile shapes of life struggling toward safety. The mist that had clung to the alley all night now lifted, revealing the world in soft, muted clarity. The mother shepherd sat calmly, her body curved protectively around her pups, who now nestled into the blankets with small, tentative sighs. The trembling had lessened, tiny eyes blinked open and closed, tails flicking in slow, cautious rhythms. She sniffed each one, nudged them into position, and pressed herself close, letting warmth travel between bodies as instinct dictated. I remained nearby, still and silent, feeling the weight of hours dissolve into a quiet satisfaction that went beyond relief. It was a deep, resonant joy, the kind that lingers long after danger has passed. The chill of night had not completely gone, but its grip had loosened, replaced by a fragile comfort that spoke of safety and care. I set down the last of the blankets and crouched close, letting the mother inspect my presence once more. She tilted her head, amber eyes flickering with a faint trust that had been impossible hours ago. She did not approach, not fully, but she did not retreat either. Her gaze lingered, tracking each motion, evaluating each heartbeat. In that moment, I realized that rescue was not only about removing the threat of cold or hunger. It was about honoring the instincts, the fears, the intelligence that had guided her and her pups through the night. Every growl, every cautious sniff, every nudge was part of a dialogue I was privileged to witness and participate in. I spoke softly, letting the words dissolve into the light, into the quiet warmth, knowing she did not need to understand them to feel the intention behind them. The pups had begun to explore their immediate surroundings cautiously, tiny paws pressing into soft grass, sniffing the earth, then retreating to the safety of their mother's body. One of the smallest dared a tentative step toward my hand, tiny wet nose brushing my fingers. The mother's ears twitched, and she let out a low rumble, not a growl, not a warning, but a gentle acknowledgement. This was acceptable, this was permitted. My chest tightened as I realized how monumental this trust was. A bond had formed, quiet and invisible, built from patience, empathy, and the slow persistence of care. The pup's tiny whimpers, once urgent and sharp, now carried curiosity, and the mother's watchful presence softened. She nudged them gently, eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey. The city beyond the park stirred faintly, distant traffic and murmurs of life a reminder of the world waiting outside this fragile cocoon. Yet here, in this lifted dawn, there was only the quiet intimacy of survival and recovery. The mother shifted, pressing each pup closer, breathing in unison with them. Their tiny bodies quivered less with cold and fear, now warmed not only by blankets but by proximity and safety. I watched, mesmerized, as instinct and trust merged, creating a tableau of quiet resilience. The air smelled faintly of wet grass, rain, and fur, a blend that seemed emblematic of survival, of connection, of life continuing despite the night's trials. I exhaled, letting my own shoulders relax for the first time in hours, realizing that the climb to warmth had not just been physical. It had been emotional, spiritual, and deeply intimate. I reached slowly to adjust the blankets around them, careful not to startle, careful not to break the invisible rhythm we had established. The mother leaned forward, nudging a pup closer to me with a delicate touch, a gesture of shared understanding. I felt a tremor of gratitude, not just for the opportunity to help, but for the privilege of witnessing such profound resilience. These lives, so small and fragile, had endured a night that would have broken lesser spirits, yet here they were, alert, aware, and beginning to feel the first tentative traces of safety. The mist continued to lift, sunlight warming the damp fur and the soft earth beneath us. Every movement was deliberate. A nudge, a sniff, a careful glance, all part of the unspoken communication between species, a testament to the enduring power of trust and care. Minutes passed like hours, each one stretching the delicate thread of hope. The mother allowed herself the faintest relaxation, lying partially on her side, eyes half closed but still vigilant. The pups nestled around her, tiny bodies pressing close, warmth radiating like a small sun in the damp morning. I reached down, letting a hand hover near her head, and she allowed me the proximity without flinching. That small gesture, seemingly insignificant, carried the weight of everything we had endured: the cold, the fear, the uncertainty, and the triumph of patience, empathy, and mutual understanding. I smiled quietly, feeling a deep, resonant joy that had nothing to do with the dramatic relief of rescue, but everything to do with the delicate intimacy of connection restored. I stood slowly, careful not to startle, letting my gaze sweep over the alley, the mist of blankets, and the small family now resting in the soft dawn. It struck me that the world beyond this park was unchanged, indifferent, yet within this tiny space, a profound transformation had occurred. Lives that had been defined by fear and survival for so long were now allowed a moment of reprieve, of gentle hope. I took a deep breath, letting the smell of wet grass, rain, and fur fill my lungs, and felt an extraordinary sense of completeness. The night had tested us all, but in that quiet morning, trust had prevailed. The mother shifted, rising slightly to stretch her legs, then returning to her pups, a quiet guardian in a world that had offered her little kindness. One by one, the pups explored further, testing the limits of their immediate surroundings, returning to safety when uncertainty crept in. The mother observed, guiding, correcting with subtle nudges, her eyes softening with each successful step. I felt the weight of the journey in my chest, a mixture of relief, awe, and deep, almost ineffable gratitude. This was the true climax. Not a dramatic chase or confrontation, but the slow, painstaking victory of trust earned and fear dissolved. As the sun climbed higher, sunlight reflecting off damp fur and puddles, the mother nudged her pups one last time into a tight cluster. They huddled together, eyes bright, tails flicking gently, shivering only slightly. I knelt beside them, watching the subtle interactions, marveling at the grace and intelligence that had guided this family through the night. The alley, once cold, gray, and threatening, had become a sanctuary of warmth, safety, and the quiet beauty of trust. The mist dissipated, revealing the full scope of the world, but the memory of fear seemed to fade beneath the golden light. Finally, I allowed myself to stand fully, giving them space to settle, knowing the journey was not yet over, but that the most perilous moments had passed. The mother's gaze met mine one last time, and I felt a connection deeper than words, a silent acknowledgement of shared survival, and the bond forged through patience, empathy, and unwavering presence. I stepped back slowly, letting the warmth and life I had helped nurture remain unbroken, a delicate promise held in fur, breath, and heartbeat. In the gentle embrace of dawn, the mother shepherd and her pups lay safe, shivering less, exploring cautiously, and beginning to trust again. The city beyond waited, but here, in the soft gold light, there was only warmth, safety, and the quiet, enduring power of care. The final image lingered in my mind. A mother shepherd, fur still damp, chest pressed protectively against tiny bodies, eyes softened yet vigilant. Pups nestled against her warmth, sunlight catching their damp coats in a shimmer of hope. In that quiet, perfect moment, the story of fear, cold, and desperate survival reached its resolution, not with spectacle, but with intimacy, trust, and the quiet poetry of life preserved.